Hi guys, welcome to the latest instalment of the nutrition course. This one is dealing with weight loss principles. This is currently not a accessible component of the course, but obviously going into the industry, it's going to be a large part of the nutritional advice that you're giving the majority of your clients, particularly when you're beginning in this industry. What are we going to look at in this one? A few different things. We'll start with the background information, and that is why, as a society, we are getting fatter. We'll look at the predictors of weight gain and help you identify who's most at risk of getting obese. We'll then delve into the science. So I've tried to compile a whole bunch of evidential science here that will help give some credence to the types of things you'll be telling your clients. And then we'll look at the best forms of exercise for our clients to perform so they can achieve their weight loss goals. Of course, none of that matters, the diet, the exercise, etc., if it's something they can't maintain over a foreseeable future. So we're certainly going to take the approach that we're not after short-term miracles. This is evidential-based science that has been proven over time to help people successfully lose weight. So we'll dive into it. So the first thing you'll see that comes up here is a video. Now this is a 20-minute video. I'm not going to play it for you now for obvious reasons. It's not good use of this time. But feel free to tap into the Moodle site and have a look at this video. It's a really cool look at the question, where does fat go when you lose it? So, you ask general population people this question. They'll tell you things like you sweat it out. It just burns away to nothing. But we're talking about an actual physical substance here in the term of fat. And physical substances don't disappear. They convert. They turn into something else, but they don't disappear. And in this case, this educator here is going to do a bit of a science experiment that shows the physical nature of fat leaving your body. And it's quite surprising if you haven't heard this theory before, but it's actually a really nice way of looking at fat in the physical context of how it leaves our body. So check it out. I certainly highly recommend that you have a look at this before cracking on with the rest of the course. But from a theory context, we start with why are we getting fatter? In one respect, if we look at this as PTs, it's a good thing for us. It means we're going to always have a steady influx of clients that are looking to lose weight. But of course, from a health perspective and wider country functioning perspective, in terms of money being spent on wholly preventable disorders, we have to really start to spread a good word around how to avoid this massive shift towards overeating and getting fatter. So there's no question it's happening. The question, I guess, is we have to address why it's happening. And these are probably some of the most common theories that are purported in scientific communities, at least. The first is a sedentary lifestyle. We are profoundly more sedentary than our ancestors. And we don't have to look that far back into our recent history to find that, the majority of workers through the sort of 50s and 60s were actually active workers. But in the subsequent sort of 50 or 60 years, we've found ways of making work easier. And by doing that, we've now become, very sedentary in terms of our day-to-day work. That's most of us. So that's sitting at a desk for long periods of day. And the reality of the average population member is that they wake up, they sit and they have breakfast. They get in the car and they sit, sometimes upwards of a couple of hours a day, going to and from work. They get to work and they sit for the entire workday. And then they sit in the car again at the end of the day, go home and feel exhausted by the whole process, a hard day's work, and then sit and eat and watch TV. So, it is... it's something that everyone's aware of. I think they should be moving more, but the general way that life sort of works these days is that people spend more time sitting than moving. The second thing is there's no question there's an abundance of food in Western culture. You go into any supermarket, you go down any street in the middle of a city, and you'll see an abundance of food options that are available, provided you have the resources to buy it. And unfortunately, the most readily accessible forms of food and the most heavily marketed forms of food are those that do nothing good for us. They are generally highly calorific. They are generally high in sugar and refined flours and grains, and these are leading to what is essentially an inflammatory disease that is obesity. So any supermarket you walk into, has its sort of aisles of value and its sort of sale-based items, and yep, the odd one might try to show that they are trying, and that's by putting, say, fruit and vegetables up front. But the reality is, you look left and right, you'll see much stronger advertising around other less nutritious forms of food. Lack of meaningful exercise. Yeah, I think, there's a growing awareness of the need to exercise because as a nation, as I say, we are having poorer health outcomes. So there is promotion around meaningful exercise, and most, a lot of people are trying. If you ask them and say, do you take regular exercise? They'll say, yeah, I do. I walk the dog, I go for a walk with my friend Julie after work and that kind of stuff, and that's cool. But we're not actually doing challenging exercise, and if we don't challenge the cardiovascular system, then we don't really achieve any meaningful outcomes from that. So there are a raft of people that are exercising, but they don't have the guidance or knowledge to exercise at the rate at which they should be to challenge that cardiovascular system and elicit a long-term change in the way that they deal with energy. And that's where we come in. So educating people to the point where they feel, yes, I do need your services as a PT is a really important skill that you have to learn. And, more than ever before, social media has made that possible to reach a whole raft of people that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to spread a message to. But it comes into something that falls a little further down here, and that is everyone's talking about it on the internet, and not everyone is qualified to talk about it, and therefore there's a whole heap of poor advice circulating as well. And when that happens, when you have good quality advice and poor quality advice circulating, people tend to just choose the thing that fits for them. And unfortunately, what most people gravitate towards is the easy route. So they figure, this doesn't look hard, this is easy, I can do this. But unfortunately, it doesn't yield the kind of results that it promises. Sleep has now become a big factor in obesity research. There is a definite link between low sleep rates and the propensity to put on excess body fat. And there's a number of reasons we'll talk through on that, and they're fairly simple by nature, but suffice to say that sleep is such a vital part of being alive and a necessity in terms of keeping our body maintenance and our mind operating the way it should. And I think when we sometimes step back and look at our day, it's yes, we go to sleep, but it's often sacrificed to some degree for other things that we're doing that we view as more important. So we'll stay up late to get something done, and we'll never make up that time that we lost. We will just sort of keep rolling on, and when time allows, we'll get back into a good sleeping rhythm, etc., etc. Alcohol is something we'll talk about shortly, but it probably relates to this lack of sleep. Often, if you're up late, what are you doing? Is it social? Are you losing this critical sleep because you're out partying, or even just sitting at home on a computer or watching TV and just supping away on beverages and food and that kind of stuff for hours where you could be asleep, that you're actually intaking a whole lot of calories your body doesn't need at that point of the day. And then the one down the bottom here is unrealistic weight goals leading to cyclic failure. And this is increasingly evident where you see people that try. They try, but in their mind is a weight loss goal that they're trying to achieve in a very short time, and they've got this unrealistic weight goal from watching TV and media representation of people that have done it, and when you see, okay, that person lost 20 kilos in 8 weeks, That's my goal. What we don't understand is the support network that those people probably had available, and we think of probably the most obvious as the Biggest Loser TV program, where they're losing ridiculous amounts of weight very, very quickly. But there's a whole support network around that. These people have psychologists working with them, they have nutritionists working with them, their meals are scripted quite carefully, they are prevented from getting access to unreasonable amounts of food, they work out really hard multiple times a day under the guidance of top personal trainers, and they're also on a world stage where they know they're going to be judged on their success or failure. And that's not the average person. The average person is often embarking on this on their own. And there's no one to keep tabs on them, and they don't have the advice when they need it. And when they start to struggle, and when the pounds don't shift the way that they were expecting them to, they say, oh God, I'm useless at this as well, I've failed, and they fall back on the crutch that they normally do when times get tough. And that's always been food, and of course that leads to a cyclic repeat of failure where they put on more weight and they try and diet again, and it leads to a very unhealthy approach to eating and food in general. So those are probably the key considerations. I left one off the bottom there, but we'll talk about it fairly soon, and that's, I put it at the bottom not because it's in any way less of a factor than the things above, but I would call the things above here the big rocks of this issue. These are the big rocks. We sit too much, we have way too much food, we don't do meaningful exercise, we're not looking after our bodies in terms of sleep, we take in baseless calories and then we look for easy fixes along the way, and there's no getting around. Those are the big rocks, and if we change those big rocks, we will get the results that we're looking for in a realistic time frame. Now, genetics is definitely going to influence this, and there's more and more science around this coming out, but we can't afford to put something up the top that is effectively an excuse. And it is an excuse because it can influence the way in which we put down fat and potentially the rate at which we can lose it, but it is a minor contributor when compared against all these things here. And the unfortunate thing is, if you pull out something like this and people have a ready excuse to say, oh well, there's nothing I can do about it, it's my genetics, and just give up, then that's buying into this whole philosophy that it's not your fault that you got fat, and it's not your fault that you can't lose that fat. The blunt reality, it is your fault. It is your fault. You sat there, ate the food, continued getting fatter, and did nothing about that. And regardless of whether genetics assisted that process, at some point you should have realised what you're doing to your body and made a change. So there's no use at the far end of that process when you're heavy, overweight and unwell, blaming genetics. Okay, at the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for the state you've put your body in. And I'll put a little caveat into that. Children is a different kettle of fish. Children don't make those lifestyle decisions, and if they're put in this position of becoming obese or overweight at a young age, it's certainly not their fault. It's the fault of the people that are supplying this lifestyle. All right, so these are some things we're going to delve into, and then of course we're going to crack into the science of it. What is the science saying? There's been heaps of science in this area because, of course, governments are very worried about the massive increases in weight gain and the strain that it's putting on society as a whole from a financial point of view in the health system. So let's start with some easy stuff. Okay, sitting and mortality, what you see in the graph here is basically the more time you spend sitting, the higher your cardiovascular risk, the higher your mortality rates. And don't worry about these numbers on the side as correlations. It's basically the more you sit, the earlier you die. So let's start with these big rocks. Let's get people moving more. And it doesn't have to be organised activity. If we can just get people moving more through the day, there are improved health associations with that. There are some cool apps that are coming out that will remind you sort of every 40 minutes, every 50 minutes to get up and do 5 minutes of something, or 3 minutes of something, or move or walk around the building, or go up a flight of stairs and across the top level of your building and down again, just to get that blood moving and to force your body to make some changes there. And this is not what we talk about when we talk about meaningful exercise. This is what we talk about when we talk about the other movement and calorie burning opportunities you have in a day. So get people moving. The abundance of food problem. Yeah, I mean, we know we have an abundance of food because we throw out ridiculous amounts of food every year. Now you've got to understand that this number here might not look so bad, $400 of perfectly good food thrown out a year by an average individual household. But, you know, there are many households in New Zealand that don't have enough food, and they're eating everything. So that translates to the fact there are many households out there that are throwing far in excess of $400, you know, getting into the thousands of dollars a year out of perfectly good food that we threw out because we didn't store it well, we didn't use it properly, we bought too much of it simply, and we just let it go to waste. And so, estimated that as New Zealanders we throw out 872 million of perfectly good food a year as a nation. And when we look at these next pictures, you know, that's a real issue, but it's quite obvious as I go through the scale of, say, 4 different countries here. This is a cool little web-based image series that looks at a week's groceries for different countries. And there's about, I believe, over 20 to 30 different countries that are on this picture series, but I've just pulled out a few to illustrate that point in Western culture, how we have this overabundance of food. So here we have a USA example. You would look at these people and say, look, they're relatively slim looking. And then look at the food that they're eating, and you know, you would have to classify that as 90% packaged food. If you look at it, you know, you put things in a package, and sure, there's some lean meat over here, which is great, a little bit of veg in here and fruit, but loads and loads of plastic, loads and loads of boxes, loads and loads of bottles of baseless calories going on here. Okay, and these guys are not fat, so you know, they're obviously getting some exercise, I'd imagine, or they're able to moderate the amount of intake of some of these things that they're eating. But when we compare that, for example, to another nation, here's Mexico, and a lot of Mexicans living on a simpler diet in many respects. You can see this is great, all of this whole food stuff here that's coming in. But then we start tracking back towards this, and maybe because of water quality or something like that, but we know, for example, that Coca-Cola has a bit of a stronghold in Mexico in general, and what we're seeing here is you know, a hell of a lot of soda coming in, and this one element of their diet could be undoing a lot of this good stuff here. Okay, so the alcohol and the extraordinary amount of Coke that's being drunk there. And you can start to see the impact of that on these kids as they're growing, and on the parents, definitely. Moving to poorer sort of areas, I believe this is Mongolia, things get a whole lot simpler. So I would classify that as 99% whole food. If you look at it, I can see it very clearly, there may be a little package in here, but you start to see some other areas that may be lacking. That's all the milk intake, for example, that they're getting. So maybe the dairy and that is not up to scratch. But a lot of fresh fruit, produce, and grains essentially here forming the basis of this food. Very simple stuff. And then we go to the other extreme from America and Western culture, and we find a country that has very little. Okay, so and one thing obviously that's associated with this country is lower body weight. So we're not certainly suggesting that the world moves towards this model, but we are essentially showing that the less food that is available to people, then the better the body composition tends to be. We see very slim looking people here. It's not to say that they're 100% healthy and they're not getting everything they need, but there's a definite swing between the Western culture here and this thing here, and it's easy to see why the Western culture is getting fat. So when we're choosing exercise, if we've made the decision to do it, the next thing is to make sure that we're maximising our abilities when we do exercise. You know, I'm convinced there's a raft of people that go to gyms on a daily basis, they slog in there, they jump on their cross trainer, they have a good natter with their friend, or they read a book on a reclining cycle, and in their mind, it was the going to the gym and the doing of some exercise that was important. And in a lot of ways it is. It's certainly more beneficial than doing nothing, absolutely. But pretty soon these people are going to see that what they're doing in terms of exercise is not eliciting the results that they want. And so what they'll move towards is a mindset that says, I tried exercise, but it didn't work for me. So exercise doesn't work for weight loss for me. Again, a lack of knowledge and a lack of intensity is the issue here, where we're not causing a change, and that's where we as PTs come in. Okay, so when we're in the gym and we're talking to these people that are knocking away on their treadmills in a walk or something like that, and we can see them nattering away with their friends, having a conversation around their goals and how those goals are sort of panning out with the exercise will pretty quickly elicit that they're not achieving what they wanted to. And that's where the PT comes in. Okay, and you can just give them some straight advice initially as a way of building rapport, or you could of course offer them a free trial with you or something to show them where that intensity marker should be for them. Okay, and once they know that information and know they're not essentially wasting time in the gym, which is often something they don't enjoy anyway, then hopefully we can elicit some results, and that will motivate them to keep coming and going for a long period of time. So I understand the need for a lot of people, and particularly women, for the social aspects of exercise, and that's important, and there's ways of achieving that while still achieving a meaningful amount of intensity in exercise. And what I've noted in my career is a lot of people that do this kind of thing, that come in and have a natter with their friend, they often leave the gym and go straight to a cafe, have themselves a coffee and a muffin, and essentially chuck on a couple of 100 calories more than what they just burned in the exercise session. But in their mind, they earned it because they did the exercise. So raising some awareness around that is really important. So sleep, suffice to say, just a really vital component of living. Your body long term will let you know if it's not getting enough sleep, and this is somewhat individual, so it's very hard to come at an exact number that people need for sleep, but most studies would suggest something like 7 hours a night would be sort of an ideal optimum for most people. The more active you are, the more tissue damage you're doing, i.e. getting up into the higher athlete sort of areas, then they would suggest raising that to more like 9 to 12 hours of rest. And, you know, most people will laugh when they hear that figure. Who has time in their day to sleep for half of it? The answer is probably elite athletes. Those are the guys who are being paid to train, eat, and sleep effectively. So, things like naps in the middle of the day and post-training naps and all that kind of stuff come into play that the average person can't do. But what we can do, really, is prioritise our health and realise that this is such a vital factor to a lot of the things that are ailing us, and prioritise our sleep, realising that we will be far more productive if we get at least a 7-hour sleep block a night. Now, when you combine low sleep over long periods of time with something called disinhibited eating traits, and we all have these. This is our inability to stop eating certain foods when they're on offer to us, and let's be honest, at home, these things are on offer to us. If they're in the cupboards, we put them there, we can always go back for more. So simple solutions to that too, and is recognising which of those foods are difficult for you to stop eating to excess, and then just trying to either limit or eliminate them from the house if you can. And that goes for things like at work as well. You know, people with drawers full of snacks and foods where they tell themselves, oh, I'll just have one of these, but actually sit there mindlessly eating them across the day. So easy to cut out. In a Quebec-based study done in 2012, they found that people that stayed up late or had under 7 hours of sleep a night typically were 2.5 times more likely to be overweight. And that was over a 6-year period they tracked these families. And they found that in the adult populations, those that had short sleep over that 6 years on average had larger waist circumference and increased weight gain over that 6-year period. As a secondary part to that study, they looked at alcohol consumption, and they found that those sleeping 6 hours or less a night on average were more likely to be consuming alcohol at over the normal sensible weekly alcohol recommendations. And that makes sense. You know, if you're up late often, what are you doing? You're potentially socialising. And if you're a night owl and you're socialising often, then, you know, as adults often there may be alcohol involved in that. And of course that's just baseless calories at a time of the day when your body doesn't need them. And then you go to sleep and your body goes, well, what do I do with these? I better store them for later because there's nothing I need them for right now. Obviously men have probably been most commonly associated with binge-type drinking, but women are quickly catching up. And the danger for women is the types of drinks that they're moving towards, particularly a young woman, and that is, of course, the RTD, the double whammy of a soda associated with some alcohol. So you get not only the alcohol calories, but of course the equivalent of about a can of soda as well, and that just ramps the calorie values right up. So there was a direct correlation between those in the study that drank more alcohol and the weight that was gained across the study. So before we move on, just what do we take out of these points that I'm bringing up? The first thing we take is there something that's actionable right now that you can do with your client? Can we identify how many of those things we've just talked about are present in your client's lifestyle? So are they getting enough sleep? And this can be part of a pre-screening form, tell me health and, how much are you sleeping a night? Give me an indication. And often you'll get people saying, I'm really stressed. I've got this work I've got to do, and then I've got kids ready, I've got all this stuff, and there's no time for me. And it works out at 5 to 6 hours a night. It's been going on for a long time. So then we try and isolate, what can we change? Can we change something there? Can we prioritize things and start to build in a little more? And let's look at how that starts to make us feel down the track. And again, it doesn't mean jumping straight to 8-9 hours sleep. It means edging things out and looking at the results of that and getting buy-in from the client to realize that it is important. On the second part of that, the alcohol intake. If we can identify how many units of alcohol that people are drinking, can we cut that down? We don't have to remove it completely. Again, whatever we do has to be part of a long-term strategy for their life and lifestyle choices. But can we make a reduction in some places where it's wholly unnecessary? Can we put something in its place that has the opposite effect, effectively, that'll lower the calorie consumption across the day, and potentially even keep them full so that they don't feel the need to take in additional calories. And as we get into the next part, we want to find out where they've been getting their advice from, because to this point somebody has shown them or told them the way that they should be eating, and of course it hasn't been working. And often when you get these people, when they come to you, they've already started to make some changes to their diet and lifestyle. The gym it's not the first thing people usually think of and go, right, I join the gym tomorrow, let's do this thing. They've been thinking about things, they're not happy with the way things are at the moment, and they've potentially started to try things. And of course, if they're trying the wrong things, that could impede their ability to do what you need to do with them in the gym. So where are we getting our advice from? Initially, we get our advice from mum, because mum probably is the primary food provider in the family in terms of what goes on the table. And mums often speak with great authority about food, even though when we actually take a step back and look at mum, does mum actually exhibit the type of body composition that we're aiming for? And if mum doesn't, then maybe that's not a great place to start. Mum probably got her advice from her mum. The difference is that food has changed dramatically across the generations. So the same sort of principles we applied back in the day. If you look 30 years ago, there was a whole lot more whole food going on the plates than there is right now. Convenience, ease, and all those kind of things are helping us with our busier lifestyles, and unfortunately food is suffering. Or maybe you've got friends that have been through a process or currently going through a process themselves. People like affirmation for the things that they do. So someone going on a diet would love to drag 4 or 5 different people alongside with them, get that sort of social support for doing it. Let's do this thing together. But again, you want to know where they've got their information from. As I've already established in the classes before, that people cherry pick information to suit, the things that they want to do. So is your friend, again, in a great position to give that advice? And maybe they did lose a whole bunch of weight doing it their way, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Okay, you have to understand their lifestyle, their level of mental toughness, what was driving their need to achieve this goal may be a completely different driver than what's going to drive you. So useful to have discussions, and really, really useful to have social support. That's really key in this process of weight loss. But are we getting quality advice? So the next place we tend to look, and sometimes the first place we tend to look, is straight on the internet. And the problem with that is that people are not very good at disseminating information in a way in which gives you a clear indication of where it came from. So, you follow someone who looks the way you want to look, and they put down the way they did it, or the way they're being paid to tell you they did it, and you go, okay, well, if that's what you're doing, that's what I need to start doing because I want to look like you. But of course, these are completely different machines that we're talking about here. If you're following an elite athlete and what they're doing, and you're not an elite athlete, that's not a good recipe for success. Okay, so we need quality science. We need quality, proven methods in which to achieve weight loss, and we need to find one that fits our individual goal sets and our individual approach to living. So Google is great. It's awesome being able to find instant information, but it really feeds that instant gratification that's going on in society right now, and that is, I need to lose this weight and I want to lose it tomorrow. And I'm going to keep searching the internet until I find something that tells me how I'm going to lose that tomorrow. Okay. I love this guy. He's funny as hell. But yeah, this is listening to the dude down at the gym. Okay, so if you don't know this guy, it's a guy, Bro Science, he calls himself. He's very tongue-in-cheek. He pokes fun at the general gym community and the types of things that are said around gyms. So 50% fact, 50% magic, 100% results. So listening to that dude down at the gym that knows, he's an authority on nutrition and authority on other things. Again, what's his background? Where does he get his information from? Some of the stuff you'll hear on the gym floor will just astound you that people. And the thing that gets me is the way it's delivered with absolute confidence. These guys deliver this stuff like they are experts in that field because they've heard it one place, or some other guy told them, or they listened to one podcast, or they read something one place, and they haven't really got the skills to be able to decipher that information accurately and look into the ins and outs, the methodologies of the studies and that kind of stuff, and they're just running with the parts of those studies that they think people want to hear. So, if we're not listening to all that, what are we listening to? And the answer is coming. We're listening to evidential science that, I guess, people like me and people that work in the exercise science fields are now making much more available to the general public. And our job, so my job is to relay information to you, and your job is to package that information into ways that your clients can understand it. Okay, so yeah, we've talked briefly about this already. So I want to see results. I want to see them now. This is the way that particularly younger populations, and they talk about millennials like this, and it's not millennials' fault. This is the way they've been brought up to expect things to be easy, to expect things to happen and happen at a rate that you want to see them happen at. Okay, so unfortunately, putting on weight has taken time, and taking off weight is going to take even longer time. And you need to understand that. First and foremost, that's probably the primary thing you need to get across to your clients. This is not a quick fix. Okay, quick fixes don't work. Dieting in general doesn't work because you come off them and then you fail. I've achieved what I wanted, I've come off it, yay, and then the weight came back on, and damn, why can't I keep this weight off? It's just not a lifestyle change, a short-term approach to calorie restriction that's going to lead you through the rest of your life, because at some point it's just too hard to maintain. So we've got to find a way in which we can maintain an adherence to this way of life for the foreseeable future. And by that I mean for the rest of your life and the capacity that you can do it. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. They've seen these quick fixes. But we all have heard, I'm sure, that every single person on The Biggest Loser puts the weight back on, and most of them put it on and some. Okay, so it's easy to forget that stuff. But even people that know that I know, they'll think, well, I won't though. I'll follow the same principle to get rid of the weight, and then I'll be really good at keeping it off when it gets to that point. But the reality is it's tough. It's so tough. And they don't understand that at this point. And of course they may achieve their goal fine, and then they will relax and they will say, oh, I did it. But that's not going to work. Okay, so we need a sustainable and realistic time frame to lose this weight in. So I'm not looking to be contentious here with these images, and I'm certainly not. I didn't write these words on this page here, but I think it illustrates a point, and that is, as society actually, does society have realistic expectations about what is normal, a normal size? And females are the easiest place to start, was because I think it is changing, but females certainly put a lot more stock, I think, into comparisons against other females, and that's simply because the majority of media is about females. So all I'm trying to illustrate here is that if this was considered a highly desirable female body shape back in the day, and then we sort of morphed in towards this, then this is a wholly unrealistic body image for a lot of women to try and achieve. Okay, so and particularly in a world that's getting more and more obese. So, and this is obviously a little bit old hat now. There are a lot of women in the media and men in the media that aren't, the size 6s and the size 8s and that kind of thing. But there still are a lot of these females out there, and one of two things happens there. Either people strive to achieve these kind of body image ideals that they have in their mind based on the media coverage, or they realise very quickly that it is never going to be me, and what's the point of trying? And both of those are potentially dangerous. So we need to help our clients understand the frame of body that they're in. They need to know a little bit about the genetics side of things and the things that are going to be very hard to undo and still maintain a healthy balance, and really get them starting to think about the health and wellness of their body first, and then the benefits will come. So we get our body healthy, we adopt healthy living practices over time, we adhere to them, you will get significant and meaningful changes in your body composition, and you will feel a hell of a lot better about the body that you're in. And that's what we need to get people owning. Okay, this is what you're currently dealing with. We can definitely make significant improvements on that, but let's take it one step at a time. Let's not have that end goal in mind right from day one. Let's work on the process that is going to help us achieve these weight loss goals. Okay, and let's look at how much you're actually willing to put into this, because at the end of the day, I can tell you all the information you need to know, but are you actually willing to make these changes on a daily basis? And if the answer to that's no, it's akin to trying to get a smoker to stop smoking that doesn't actually want to stop smoking. Okay, if you really enjoy the process of smoking, and you really enjoy, you look forward to those times where you go and have a smoke and a coffee and that kind of stuff, I can harp on to you all I want about the dangers of smoking, but the reality is, for you to give up long term, you're actually going to have to want to make that change. And the same goes as food is your crutch and food is your thing. I can tell you as much as you like about how to lose weight and make better choices, but at the end of the day, you're not going to buy into that process fully because I like what I like and I eat what I like. Then you've got to realise that you're not going to achieve those results you want, and that's fine. It just means you have to be more realistic about setting those goals. So when we sit down with a client and we actually nut out these goals, we are clear with them that this is what you're going to have to do to achieve that. Are you willing to do that? If the answer is no, are you willing to do that for the rest of your life? If the answer is no, then okay, we need to adopt a better plan here. Okay, and to give you an example, I've had women that have come to me that have set me a goal. They're in their mid-80 kilo range, and they've set me a goal of 60 or under. And I've said, when is the last time you were 60 and under? And they've said, I've never been 60 or under as an adult. Now, as a 45-year-old woman, what makes you think you're going to be able to get back to that sort of level, and what sort of life do you think you're going to lead to enable that? Is it a life you actually want to live? And if we have to be as strict as we need to be to achieve and maintain that sort of weight in a body that's never had it, I think there's more realistic ways of doing that. So whatever we talk about going forward, guys, we have to remember that there are some overriding themes that are going to supersede anything else that we talk about. And you guys are fully aware of this one, I'm sure. You've heard this one before, the simple energy in, energy out rule of thumb. And we're going to talk about a lot of things that are additives to this, but this still rings true. I tell you this categorically, that if you put more energy in your body than you burn, you will put on weight. Now, the amount of weight you put on might change from individual to individual, but you will put on weight. And on the other side of the coin, if you expend more energy or restrict the energy intake more than the energy that you've been consuming, then you will lose weight. And again, you will lose it at potentially different rates, depending on a number of factors, but the science is clear. That is the bottom line for weight gain and weight loss. If you consume too much for the amount of activity or the amount of energy burn that you're creating. So keep this in mind. In saying that, there are individuals who are more at risk of putting on body fat and also losing it. So if we look at this here, this is the same construct as above, but you can see the seesaw here of energy in and energy out, but it's indicating that there are a lot more things to consider here. Let's start with the simple stuff. So energy in is the food and drink that you consume. So the calorific nature of the food and drink that you consume. Not only the calorific nature, but what it's made up of, the macronutrient density, the quality of the food, whether it's a whole or refined product. These can all have impact on how that energy is used. And then there is your ability to actually use that fuel, the efficiency of fuel use. And that can come down to things like your gut health, so your ability of your intestinal wall to deal with the amount of food that you're eating and use it efficiently. It can also come down to your fitness level and the types of fuel you typically burn. And it can come down also to the type of food that you're eating and how much energy is needed to actually digest and absorb that food. So we'll be talking about those next. And then there's the energy out sort of stuff that we'll be talking about later. And that, of course, includes exercise. But exercise is only a small part of energy out. You know, it's estimated that the average person exercises only around 10%. And this is a regular exercise, about 10% of calorie burn for the day. Okay, so if you think about someone who's doing a 2,500 calorie has a 2,500 calorie intake, that's a 250 calorie workout that they're doing, and that's about an average sort of gym workout for the normal sort of population coming in. Now, if you've got higher levels of fitness, like the guys I'm talking to you right now, you'll burn more calories than that in exercise, and the advent of these Fitbits and calorie trackers are a great way of determining sort of how much you can get through in your exercise sessions. Then the word activity, that's in the middle there, that's just how much you move again. So if you have an active job, I have a very active job. I'm on my feet more than I sit, and we're doing not necessarily what I'd call exercise all day, but we're definitely moving a lot more than an average person, and therefore my calorie requirements are going to be a lot higher than an average person. Okay, so how much do you actually move during the day is really important as well. And then we have those genetic differences, which, you know, to put a number on it, somewhere between a 5 and 15% variance in weight gain or ability to lose weight could be at play there. But then you've got these other factors on the side here that I would argue are equally important as the amount of energy that you're putting in and out. Okay. Now, obviously, they're the overarching theories, but do you actually have any support? Do you have anyone that will keep you on the straight and narrow when you fall off the rails? Do you have the support of people around you in your household, for example, when you're trying to eat healthily, that just continually put those tasty, calorie-dense foods in front of you because they're eating them all the time? Is there a level of support that will help you get through when the going gets tough? And it will get tough. Do you actually have the intrinsic motivation to keep doing this long term? Do you have the intrinsic motivation? Does it come from you? Or are you doing this for someone else? You know, a lot of my clients in the past, the motivation for coming and doing it was because a significant other had told them they were getting fat and that they needed to do something about it. Well, that's not intrinsic motivation. That's coming from the outside, and that's never going to be enough to sustain you. You need to have a want to achieve this because it's not easy. Whatever you choose in terms of a diet or exercise plan, you still have to be happy with it. So long term, you have to find that it fits into your daily lifestyle and actually makes you feel good. And if it makes you feel awful, then you're never going to stick at it for a long period of time. So are you actually happy? And you've got to get your life areas, the things that cause you stress and that are causing you potentially to overeat, etc., to change in your life before you can concentrate on something like this. So we can mentally make a decision to lose weight. But if we're actually very unhappy in our crux when we become unhappy and stressed as to turn to alcohol or food, etc., then we have an issue that we haven't dealt with yet. Cultural background could play a part in this. You know, I think of Pacific Island families and how some of the young athletes, some young lean athletes that I've dealt with are often ridiculed by their family for being tiny and skinny and that kind of thing. So something to consider when you're working with different population groups. Sleep, we've talked about the importance of that, and stress. As I mentioned before, if stress is a key component of your life, then how you deal with it when I look at an overweight person is typically by negative means, and that is consuming food or alcohol. So can we attenuate that stress? Can we use that stress to drive other elements of our life, like exercise? Can we utilize exercise and sleep as a major stress combat tool that we use positively, and it helps us achieve our goals? All right, so we're going to move across for this next little bit into genetics and environment, and this will end the first part of this lecture series. There's a lot to talk about here, so I don't want to keep you here for 2 or 3 hours in one hit. So the genetics and environment debate, do people get fat because of where and how they live, or do they get fat because they never had a choice in the matter? It was destined to be because of their genetics. Do overweight parents have overweight kids because of the genes they passed down, or is it because they created the same environment in that household that made the parents fat? So the answer is very difficult to get at, because to do that you would have to take pair-matched genetics, so effectively identical twins, which are quite hard to find, and you would have to put them through the same process or a different process in terms of the same environment, and what would we expect to see in the same environment? The exact same outcome for both twins. Okay, or if we put them in different environments, we would expect to see a different result. If one was overfed and ate and the other one didn't, then we would expect to see the one that was overfed gain considerably more weight than the other one over time. So that's kind of what the studies that are coming up looked at. These are the key risk factors for overweight and obesity, and we've talked them through. So no high-intensity exercise. It's amazing how long people can go in their life cycle without doing any high-intensity exercise. I asked my wife the other day, when was the last time you sprinted? Like full noise sprinted for something? And she said, at school. So my wife is 43. So there is potentially 25 to 30 years where she hasn't sprinted. She hasn't done a high-intensity type sprint because there was no call to do it in the things that she's interested in. So worrying statistics. There'll be people out there that have lived longer than you that have not done high-intensity exercise for a time frame that's longer than you've been alive. And that is a really worrying stat. Lower socioeconomic status. Yep, if you can't afford a lot of these good foods that we're suggesting, these whole foods, and let's be honest, a lot of the crap foods are cheaper and easier to obtain, then we have an issue. Okay. Lower dietary calcium, we'll discuss that later. Calcium's role in potentially in weight loss, family lifestyle choices. If you are surrounded by people in your family that are obese and your friends are obese that you hang around, there's a high likelihood you're all doing the same types of things that you view as normal, and unfortunately that increases your risk of becoming overweight. If you have high disinhibition eating behaviours, there's quite a few foods that you continually put in the house that you simply can't stop at one or can't stop at a couple, then that is an issue we need to resolve. Short sleep we've talked about. And while science is changing a little around this high-fat diet, there's a diet called the ketogenic diet, which is 75% fat. The problem is that, again, if you're choosing to go on this type of diet, but you're not clear on what sort of foods you should be choosing, you choose things that are tasty, etc., then you're probably going to go into a situation where you're choosing processed type foods, and dangerous long-term consequences can come from eating the wrong types of fat in high doses. And then we have the genetics factor down here. So it has been associated in mainstream science with being a factor in obesity. So let's say we do take identical twins. In this 1990 study, Bouchard et al. Took a dozen identical twins. They put them in isolated conditions, so they put them under observation 24/7 to make sure there were no outlying factors at play here. They chose identical twins that lived together, so they had the same sort of lifestyles and they'd been raised together. Okay, these people had no history of obesity. They had no history in their family of obesity or cardiovascular disease or anything like that. So obviously pretty hard to find. So a unique type study. They then decided to overfeed these identical twins in exactly the same way, and they were hoping that they would respond in exactly the same way, because therefore genetics would play a role. What they were also expecting was that while two people that are twins would respond in the same way, that there would be significant differences between individuals. So this study basically overfed everyone and was looking at, is there a considerable difference between identical genetic pairings, but more importantly, did both genetic pairings, do they respond the same way, because they have the same genetics. So they were overfed by 1,000 calories a day for 100 days. This is a meaningful long-term study. You know, probably pretty fun too if you like your food. Not so much if you're worried about getting overweight. So what happened? Everybody gained weight. The average gain was about 8 kilos over the 100 days, so significant weight gain. And the results of the study showed that while the average was 8 kilos, there was a significant variance between different sets of twins. If we look at this picture here, this shows you that at one end of the scale here, some people gained around 4 kilos, and in the same study with the same conditions, some people were putting on 12 to 13 kilos. Now, there's a whole bunch of discussion points that need to come out of this, but if we look at it on the surface straight away, we see that under the same conditions, one group didn't put on much fat or weight, and one put on a significant amount of weight up here, and then there were people through the middle. And the interesting thing here was that most of these graph icons that you see here were actually twin pairs. So this was one set of twins here, the same sort of response, another here, very minor differences, another here, very minor differences, and almost across the board, pair twin statistics were placed next to each other. So these guys here were a pair of twins, and these guys here were a pair of twins, and we saw probably the biggest outlier over here. So what were they able to conclude from this? They were able to conclude that individual weight gain and fat deposit areas varied greatly between pairs, but were very similar within. So that means that twins gained roughly the same amount of weight and also put that fat on in the same places. They also suggested that evidence was enough to propose that there was a genetic predisposition to storing fat versus lean tissue, because what they also saw in some groups or some pairs is that they not only put on fat, but they put on lean muscle tissue, which showed that their body was willing to convert some of the extra calories into lean tissue. Now, as a little validity checkpoint here, it's important to note that some of these individuals, because they were slim individuals, were actually underweight going into this process. And if you were underweight going in, then it's likely that your body would try to make up that difference as you started to overfeed, and therefore people not only put on fat, but also put on some lean muscle tissue. But it did strongly indicate that genetics influenced not only weight gain, but where you store it as well. Now, somehow they managed to convince 7 of the identical twin pairings to stick around for about another 100 days, 93 days to be exact. And this time, they were going to create a 1,000 calorie deficit daily. And the way they did this was obviously by restricting a diet and also making them cycle every day. Okay. So these people were performing between sort of 45 and 90 minutes of cycling at different intensity, but as long as they achieved a specific calorie deficit, then they were allowed to remain in the study. The average weight loss across the 93 days was 5 kilos, or 4.9 kilos of that being fat. Okay. Now, that alone lets you know that it's harder to lose weight than to gain it. You know, over the same rough time period there, they were putting on an average of 8, and they've lost an average of 5. Okay. Now, weight loss, more interestingly, ranged between 1 and 8 kilos. So let that sink in for a moment. That means somebody, or a pair of individuals, exercised for 93 days, maintained a calorie reduction of 1,000 calories, deficit daily, and lost 1 kilo of body weight for that effort. Now, if you're a weight loss client that tried to, followed the same protocol of biking every day for 93 days, creating 1,000 calorie deficit, and you lost 1 kilo of body weight, you would be pretty upset with that result, I'm sure. So once again, twin statistics were significantly alike between the identical siblings, but considerable variance was present between the different twins. And what they found were that some people were actually very high lipid oxidizers, fat burners. And yes, there were some links there between the fitness levels of these individuals, which wasn't taken into account at the time of choosing. So those that were more highly trained were actually able to deal with the fat a lot better than those that weren't. Some people were low lipid oxidizers genetically, and some were high oxidizers genetically. So what they've been able to determine from that is that they're getting to a point now where they look for common genetic markers in people. So with enough studies under the belt now, we can identify a low lipid oxidizer and a high lipid oxidizer. And what that means is you will be more responsive to exercise as a means of getting rid of this additional body fat, whereas other people will have much slower responses to exercise in terms of fat burning, and we'll have to look at other methodologies. Now, we don't need these tests, these genetic tests, to work that out. When you're working with a client and you put them through a typical sort of weight loss program that's been very successful with other people and that doesn't shift the weight, then we might consider them a low lipid oxidizer. Now, there's ways of improving lipid oxidation, and that's to get fitter. We've talked about that in previous lessons. So your focus then becomes on the fitness elements of what you're doing in the gym rather than focusing so much on the scales. The other thing you're going to have to be really interested in then is if exercise is not a big mover for your client, then it's going to have to be the nutrition that does the majority of the work, and you're going to have to get a little tougher around the nutritional aspects. So this study strongly indicated that genetics plays a large role in the prevalence of weight gain, and again, in the loss of weight gain. Okay, so in some of the twins who lost the most weight, they actually gained lean mass during the study. So the exercise, because they weren't trained as well, there were a small group of these twins that, because they weren't trained, actually got training effect from doing the exercise, gained some lean mass, which enabled them to burn more calories during the day. And that was to enable a greater amount of fat loss overall. So while their body composition improved in terms of fat loss, the study was measuring weight. And of course we know that muscle is heavier than weight. So what do we take from this? It suggests that susceptibility to gaining weight with overfeeding and sensitivity to negative energy balance from exercise is influenced by genetics, meaning it's highly individual. However, except in very rare cases, the genes that impact on body weight do not directly cause obesity. It's still putting the excessive food in your mouth. Okay? Your genetic makeup can influence your susceptibility to weight gain, but so can your environment. So this is why I talked about before not putting this front and center, because this gives an excuse. There's nothing I can do about it. There is heaps you can do about it. It's about now choosing the correct approach to deal with what we know we have in front of us. Okay, if we have a poor environment in front of us, we have a history in this person's recent ancestry of obesity and cardiovascular disease and all of those markers of poor living, then we know we've got an uphill battle in front of us. Okay, and unless we can do something about that environment, it's likely that this person is going to go down the same route. So it also tells us that every individual that comes to you is an individual, and that's why just throwing them a standardized weight loss program is not a means for which to gain successful results with all your clients. Okay, we have to know more about the client. We have to know more about the environment they're in, more about their individual motivation levels, and more about the way they're thinking and what they expect to happen when they embark on this journey. How quickly do they think this weight is going to fall off? What are their expectations? Okay. The last thing I'll leave you with is that regardless of the differences in those studies that we just looked at, every single person who overate gained weight, and every single person who went on calorie restriction lost weight. Okay, so really important that we understand that the overriding principles still count. So guys, that's a great place to pause this one. That's been sort of an introduction to the topic. In the next installment of the weight loss lecture series, we'll be looking at the science. We'll be looking at the types of diets that tend to work or not work, and we'll be looking at the types of exercise that people should be doing to maximize their weight loss. So thanks for listening in, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.